Greetings, my name is Jeff Milson. I am an executive member on the board with the Brantford and Area Sports Hall of Recognition, and I have the pleasure today to be interviewing inductee Rick Mannen. Rick, thank you for taking your time and welcome.
Thank you for having me.
So, what drew you to your sport in the beginning?
Boy, that goes way back, because I think it was grade 6 or 8, so many years ago. And a teacher approached me because they saw me in just general sports or phys ed, that I was fast as a youngster. They said, why don't you go in the public school cross-country meet, which was then at the time Mount Vernon, which is a little village between Brantford and Brantford. And I don't remember a lot about the race, except there was a big hill on it. And by the way, I didn't train for anything. And back then, you didn't train for anything. I got to the top of the hill and I finished the race, and I remember being sick to my stomach and thinking, even as a youngster, I'm never going to do this again. and that's kind of where it stayed for 2 years until I got to high school. And again, the same thing happened. I was playing different sports, and Bill Lord, one of the coaches, phys ed teachers, noticed I was a little faster, and he said, why don't you start to work out with me? Because at that time, he was one of Canada's best sprinters. So I got into sprinting just by following him, running around the halls at Pauline Johnson High School, and years later becoming a marathoner. So I don't know how that happened from being a sprinter to a marathoner, but it did.
Just natural progress,
I guess.
So he would be a mentor. Who else would be mentors that you would have had along the way?
Oh boy, every coach I've ever had, but I would be remiss if I didn't say the first mentor that I have to mention would be my wife, Josie. And some people might think that's a bit of a corny thing to say, but we were married young. We were high school sweethearts.
Wow.
I was 20, she was 19. And so we were kids, basically, and we learned together, and I learned a lot from her, just from what her family upbringing, and I learned a lot from her. But other than that, coaches. Every coach that I've ever had. I mentioned Bill Lord, Mr. Gardner at Pauline Johnson, Peter Pym, who was my main coach when I enjoyed most of my success as a marathoner. But I had one interesting coach. I also played badminton, played a number of different sports. But in badminton, Edith Heyman, who is also an inductee into this sports hall, she always said to me, you'd be a better badminton player than a runner. And she was always disappointed that I chose running instead of badminton, but she was a huge mentor in my life as well.
Well, with your journey in your career, what were some of the highlights that you could discuss?
Well, I have to say first is when I represented Canada at the World Cup Marathon Championships in Seoul, South Korea, and then also represented Canada at the Pan-Pacific Marathon Championships in Long Beach, California. Anytime you put on a Canadian uniform, it's a moment to be proud of, and you never forget that. So that's definitely two highlights. Other highlights would be winning the Toronto International Marathon and against an international stacked field, and then going over to Hong Kong and winning an international race there was huge. But I have to say, even running local races, the Brantford Classic, which is, 40 years old now, I remember running that race and not always winning, but always having the support of the local crowd, and that was always important to me.
Now, what obstacles did you maybe encounter along the way that it really had to push through and persevere to keep on your track, so to speak?
Well, lots of obstacles as athletes. I mean, it's never an upward trajectory, right? There's always peaks and valleys, and often there's a lot of valleys, and you have to work through that. And like most athletes, I endured a lot of different impact-related injuries because of running, and often on hard surfaces. And 40 years ago, we didn't have the new shoes and technology today, so didn't have the right protection or the best protection. So a lot of injuries, but I think that being injured and having setbacks it allows you to relook at your goals, maybe make adjustments in your training program, and reset yourselves.
Yep.
And one thing I always did when I did get injured, I didn't like it, obviously, but it's like a forced setback and a forced rest. So I always enjoyed that period of time to reset, re-energize, and get re-motivated again.
Great. So what does it mean to you specifically to be inducted into our hall?
It's humbling is probably the best word I put, because most athletes, and myself included, we don't do it for that reason. But to be recognized by your own community and to be part of the sporting history in the Brantford and area is pretty amazing. And I always like to think, gee, if there's one young person that walks into the sports hall and sees my picture or looks at my story and gets inspired to do something in life, that says a lot for me. That's what's important to me.
Well, that's a good segue. Because what advice would you have for younger athletes or up and coming athletes who are maybe wanting to make that push?
Yeah, I would say try to determine what a goal is, and it doesn't mean to be your ultimate goal, but young or old, come up with a goal. Maybe it's a far-reaching goal, maybe not. Write it down. I always think it's important to write it down and have that goal somewhere obvious to see in your house, so that you can always be reminded of what it is when the time gets tough or whatever you need to get re-inspired or re-motivated. But also set, I call them secondary goals along the way, because it's important. I think it's important to enjoy the journey.
Yeah.
If you just work towards the one goal, and sometimes, unfortunately, that can never be attained. If you don't have some secondary goals that you've achieved along the way, then it can be pretty disheartening. So I think you have to be prepared for setbacks and be prepared that even if you don't meet that ultimate goal, you've had a good run along the way and enjoyed the journey. That's important.
Well, it's quite a thrill for me today, because my first introduction with you was during the torch relay way back in 2010, and you were quite a gentleman and willing to kind of share some of your experiences then, and we've had lots of interaction in between then and now, and so to be able to sit here with you today has been quite an honor, and congratulations on your induction, and good luck with the future endeavors.
Thank you, Jeff.